All right, I think we'll get going here. Thank you everyone for joining us tonight. I've muted everybody on entry, but I've let everyone have the ability to unmute themselves. Just muted everybody to keep the kind of the background noise. So I'll let everybody monitor themselves if they want to speak. You can also, of course, raise hands. I will share my screen and get going on the slideshow here, the presentation. All right. And just to let you know, this is, of course, Cannon Beach Transportation System Plan. My name is Jeff Adams. I'm Community Development Director. We have Mike Benefield here sitting with me. It's a fairly quiet room. We did have some this morning in the audience and wanted to let everyone know that we are open again for business here at City Hall, and that if you want to come to public meetings, you're welcome to come in person. Mask is optional. Some have been wearing them in the meetings and others haven't. So feel free to join us. It's nice to get people back in here and getting to see some faces, like I said this morning, and also to get like Mike appreciates brewing up a fresh pot of coffee. And so we'll get going here. This is our open house meeting. This morning we had our project advisory committee meeting, 8:30 to 10 this morning. All of these will be posted on our website, and I always recommend everyone get an opportunity to go to Cannon Beach, tsp.com. Check out those project library page for the latest in reports and documents that are associated with the project. And also, like I said, our website houses all of the old meetings and audio and video for all our meetings, which have been open to the public. So just the meeting guidelines real quick, and we'll go over that. Unfortunately, Eddie, our consultant who ran this morning's meeting, isn't available, wasn't programmed to do these meetings. We've added more and more meetings, especially public Zoom meetings, outreach meetings throughout the project, and we'll get into that timeline here in a minute. But he wasn't scoped to do every single one of these meetings. So unfortunately for you guys, you're stuck with me. Like I said, if you want, you can see his presentation from the pack, which is very similar, hopefully, to what I'll be presenting, and that'll be recorded. But like I said, I've muted everybody, but you can unmute yourself. I welcome that if you have questions or comments throughout the process. What I'm going to try to do is do it at about an hour and 15 minutes, the presentation. Then we can open it up for discussion and get into more matters. But if there's a point or something, a substance or that you'd like to discuss along the way, feel free to let us know. And like I said, you can always raise your hand with Zoom. A lot of people do not know that after they raise their hand and they answer the question, you also have to manually go back in and lower that raised hand. If we don't hear or if you're not comfortable speaking in public, please always reach out to me, Adams at ci-beach.or.us, or feel free to give me a call. And one of the great things that every one of our meetings so far, everyone's been very respectful. The dialogue's been great. We've had some great conversations at both the PAC and the open house meetings, and just hope to promote and continue that throughout the rest of this project. So briefly, the agenda, introductions. I think the only one left here is Bruce, who is sitting over in the corner, our city manager. And he's here if we have any questions as well. And then I'm happy to let everyone kind of go down the list and introduce themselves if they want to, or we can just get going. I think everyone looks at these. I think we all know each other. So let's just get going. If you got a question or you want to discuss something, introduce yourself, and that way we can all catch up on things as we go through this. So I'm going to do the context of the TSP, draft TSP, and then the next steps. And so to begin with the TSP, the context, if you haven't joined us for any of these so far, some of this will be kind of a repeat, but we want to keep touching base on what led us here and why we're doing this project. This addresses our transportation needs for a 20-year time frame. And so a lot of the things you're going to see are going to be a spectrum of projects and programs and policies that stretch out over a 20-year horizon and possibly beyond. And so we may have some short-term projects that may could be implemented tomorrow with a consensus and decision by our council. And yet we may have some that we don't see happening over the next 10, 15 years, but we see somewhere down the line. So we also assess the existing and future conditions, develop draft and preferred alternatives, identify projects, programs, policies, and standards. And projects can be anything from like intersection treatments, programs, parking management, policies, coordination with transit providers, complying with state rules and regulations, and then how does this all align with other planning projects that are ongoing, and then standards, of course, like street widths and sidewalk and other measures, and then funding options and implementation strategies. All these are incorporated into a transportation system plan. And so one of the things that I have always been excited about, of course, is that, what this is an opportunity for Cannon Beach to kind of set the course for the next 20 years and to look at transportation solutions that preserve the village character and the village feel. And that makes Cannon Beach special. That's been our number one goal and priority all along. It's to balance the needs of year-round residents, visitors, and those who do business in Cannon Beach, and to provide safe and comfortable pedestrian and bike connections throughout town, and that are consistent and dedicated sidewalk paths, street crossings, bike lanes, and can access evacuation routes and assembly areas. When we wrote this grant, one of the main proposals was to make this part of a spectrum of planning, to look at emergency management just as an evacuation and assembly areas, just as much a part of the planning as the day-to-day land use planning actions that take place with Planning Commission and Design Review Board. So tie those together to meet housing, transportation needs, and parking needs. And so it's a multi-level process, and it's fed from the bottom up. How this is tiered is that we have a project management team that is the consultants and part of our staff. We advise the project advisory committee, which is area and regional representatives that are more technical or staff oriented, with some public and nonprofits and others that are invested in and they meet usually on the same days that we meet on these evening public open house meetings. They meet in the morning for project advisory committee meetings. All of those are taken into account to the recommendation to advise the Planning Commission, who then recommend to the City Council for the decision on the TSP, on adopting the TSP project. And so where are we in the process? We began back in January 2021. We've actually had, this is our fourth open house and not just the third. We added an extra one between 2 and 3, so that we've had 4 different open houses so far. We expect to have another open house as part of the adoption process, part of that public hearing process in the spring and summer of 2022. And community engagement. One of the, I think, challenges of the pandemic was how are we going to reach out and get the community involved in this process and keep them engaged in the process? I think it's a fine balance, especially when we don't have the opportunity to meet in person, is to keep people engaged, get them the information that they need so that they can process that, get back to us and give feedback to us, but keep them engaged through over a year-long process. And that's always a balancing act, definitely a balancing act during COVID. So our first milestone in 2021 was on goals and needs. And that was to share information, gather public feedback about the overall TSP process, goals, and existing future needs and priorities. We held the Project Advisory Committee meeting and that public Zoom webinar on June 3rd. We held an online open house, this interactive platform that you can connect, ask survey questions, and get people involved through our Cannon Beach TSP website. That was launched on June 3rd and we kept open for over a month. We did a supplement after we got the feedback from that. We got such feedback on just the general transportation network. And by far, the number one concern was parking. So we went out and did an extra supplemental parking survey, July 12th through July 27th. Milestone 2 was in the fall of 2021, sharing information and gathering public feedback about the draft alternatives. And we included a project advisory committee meeting and Zoom webinar on September 22nd. We also launched an online open house as part of that on September 22nd. We went and did a Spanish version of that online open house and also invited our Spanish-speaking citizens to engage with them in November. Then we held a joint planning commission city council workshop on November 9th. Like I said, we added another series of open houses and Zoom webinars and project advisory committee meetings back in February 3rd. And then milestone 3, which is where we're at today, the draft TSP and adoption. And that we held the project advisory committee meeting this morning. We're having this Zoom webinar today. We will launch the online open house on Monday. That'll be up and available. We'll get the word out through our website and blast to our connections. And so hopefully, if you're watching this, get the word out, get people to get out there on Monday and start giving us feedback on this draft TSP. Joint Planning Commission and City Council workshop is scheduled for May. A planning commission commission hearing later in May, and then we will go to the city council hearing for adoption in June, and that's the scheduled process. And so the key findings so far from those early community engagement, of course, these are the infamous wordles that break down what are the words that are most prevalent in a lot of that contact. I think everyone knows that parking was a big concern, but the village feel and keeping the context of that village character as part of the transportation alternatives, in relation to not just car, but getting people out of their cars and walking more, biking more, and connecting all of those and coordinating all of those different routes. The draft TSP incorporates all of the previous work from the surveys to the outreach that we've done at each one of these different events through our public comments that come into us through feedback that will be also posted to the website. And then everything from the draft alternatives to the preferred alternatives, all of that's combined, including what we'll get from this feedback event and the draft TSP work that we've got out there, that will all be incorporated into the transportation system plan. So just kind of give you a brief overview of what the transportation system plan looks like chapter wise. Chapter 1 is on purposes and introduction, existing future needs. Chapter 3 is the goal and objectives. 4 is transportation system plan. 5 is funding and implementation strategies. And chapter 1 is really how we arrived at what we have, and it coordinates with other policies and plans, defining that purpose of that, which we did in the early work, incorporating that into and what led us to future alternatives and needs. And so the existing and future transportation needs is chapter 2. We looked at, we did 2 different exposures of parking and looked at that on a general or what we would call maybe an off-season time period. And then we did it at one of our busiest time, a Thursday and a Saturday of one of our busiest weekends of the summer. So we got a balance to see just how our existing street network and parking systems are functioning. We've done a different series of transportation, actual use, transportation system use studies and pedestrian use studies. One of the fascinating findings, if you go back and look at some of those documents, is that the portions of our pedestrian network were as busy at times as anything in downtown Portland as at their peak times. And so we do, when we say we have, 10,000 or so population during a peak season, it's definitely it bears out in those reports that we've received. And so public transportation, pedestrian, bicycle safety and system, freight, emergency response and safety, all of that's incorporated into existing and future transportation needs section of the TSP. Chapter 3 are the goals and policies, and it gives the guidance for and also the scoring evaluation criteria for how would these projects meet these needs and these community priorities, and gives us an ability to kind of evaluate those. Finally, under the goals, I won't really go over those goals again. We've gone over quite a few times. But, I've mentioned many times that it's to keep the village character, but it's also to look at the safety and emergency. Something I hear about all the time is that, safe crossings and how does that tie with some of the tsunami evacuation areas and some of the, how can we help leverage some of that in our funding process because there is often hazard mitigation type of funding for emergency response that we can tap into to help us do some of these trail networks and to incorporate that into the general transportation system. And so what this does in the next step that we'll be seeing come Monday, once the draft TSP is released, you're also going to be seeing a new component that we haven't really touched on, which are the draft policy examples that will be that are informed by what we've seen in the preferred alternatives. Well, what's the policies that we need to have in place? There couldn't be a better time for us to do this as we look at our code audit and look at those gaps that we're seeing between the comprehensive plan and our ordinances that are in place, to also look at these draft policy ideas and how they might be incorporated into the new code and a comprehensive plan language that might develop out of the code audit. One example, or a couple examples for this that was brought up, for a draft street policy. These haven't been reviewed yet by staff or by anyone, but it just gives you a brief idea for local city streets may be reconfigured by the city for use as pedestrian plazas and or include many roundabouts in order to create community and reinforce the use of streets for all modes. As you know, we have nothing in our comprehensive plan right now that speaks to the possibility of pedestrian plazas or many roundabouts. And although those are projected for maybe 10 or 20 years horizon, they should have policies, or at least we should have policies ready to be put in place if we decide to go down that route, our decision makers. And the same with draft street policy 9. The city recognizes a need to provide safe and convenient pedestrian access within new subdivisions, multifamily development, and shopping centers are necessary to support a variety of modes of transportation in the community. So if we're looking to incorporate more and more levels of service or modes or networks, then what we want to do is also have policy statements in there that do that. And one of the things that I think you'll find, or we will find through our code audit, is to look in there how little emergency and hazard mitigation and that type of language is in our current comprehensive plan, and often even addressed in zoning language. So those are some of the improvements that I think this process, the transportation system plan, can help inform that code audit process as well. And they can work hand in hand as we start developing these policies. And so the chapter 4, the draft transportation system, will organize, or it's going to be organized by mode. It includes the prioritization of projects. You'll see tables in there that are keyed towards these maps like you see here on this slide, and builds upon projects in the past memos and incorporates PAC feedback and public input. So each one of these, where you see the V1, B2, B3, and so on, those then will be keyed to a matrix that gives you a level of when that time horizon is, how much the funding and possible funding stream that might be needed to accomplish this, and gives you a spectrum of choices of how to resolve some of these transportation issues that we have. As Eddie showed this morning, as he spoke about this, you know, this has always been about, the TSP project's always been about incorporating all different modes of transportation, allowing different options or encouraging different options once someone arrives in Cannon Beach, and to connect those different modes. Some of the language that you'll see in the document, whether it's transportation demand management or parking management systems, it's not simply capital improvement projects. It's not simply a new roundabout or a new four-way stop. It's also other strategies. And so whether it's a parking management system where we might charge for parking, or TDM strategies where we let people know that are in Portland that we're at 80% of our capacity, or things like that, communication type systems. There's all kinds of things that are considered in this, and given a priority or a place within the system, a suggested plan for the future. And so one of the things we also look at is emerging transportation systems. And we'll speak a little bit about that on a couple of slides, but it's to incorporate not just things that can be done now, like the four-way stop signs that are suggested at Warren Way and Hemlock, First and Second in Hemlock, but that's something that can be done rather low cost. I think Eddie said this morning at approximately $7,000 or something per intersection, to something that's much more expensive but a longer range recommendation, something like the mini roundabouts that's suggested over there on the right. So what the transportation professionals tell us through the modeling and what the reports say, a good portion of our current needs could be met through just four-way stop solutions, which would also help pedestrian management and movements in the city. But we might see if the rates continue for growth in tourism and day traffic and travel, we might see those stressed, and we can see those level of services drop over the horizon of a 10, 20-year horizon if those trends continue. If that's the case, we might seek the longer term and higher cost solution like the roundabouts in certain areas, which when modeled with these higher throughputs of traffic still meet the level of service of A instead of the F that that come up if we don't start solving or allowing some of these solutions. So these are things that that are addressed in our transportation system plan, but it's also something that our elected officials gives them options in the future and a spectrum of solutions of how they want to handle it and with the feedback of the citizens. Just a couple of examples. I think just the one I said with the roundabouts, but one of the ones that we heard quite a bit throughout this process is on closing portions of the downtown to plazas, opening up kind of pedestrian plazas. I think this one here is one from Laguna Beach. There's others. I went to school in CU Boulder, which has got one of the more famous pedestrian malls in America. It's been around since I think the late 60s, early 70s. And so there's all kinds of these throughout the country. One of the great things that we heard during the feedback and one of the things that's being proposed as part of the TSP project is that this can be done as a pilot project. It doesn't have to be a high cost kind of all-in affair where we play all the cards at once. And we can model this seasonally. We can model this pilot tested over a certain segment, first and second, or between first and second, or other areas. But that was one of the most highly rated responses that we got. And I think that kind of thing could easily be kind of rolled out over the next year, and we might see something like that as kind of a first step and see how it goes. Another one, and this is this is the TSP, what I talked about, the matrix that's part of there showing the different kind of intersection improvements that can be done. Another suggestion there, also kind of the sometimes could be coordinated with the plazas, is the one-way loop systems that throughout the downtown segment where we parallel streets or Hemlock and Spruce would be going in one-way loops. That's also an alternative that could be piloted. Doesn't have to be an all-in type of project. As I said, throughout the process, parking management, parking is more than even location in Cannon Beach. And I hear daily, about our parking concerns or the parking issues, not just in downtown, but throughout Cannon Beach. I think we see more and more, even in the Tolovana area during the peak season, more complaints about parking and issues down there. And so parking management has come up in time again throughout this process. One of the things Eddie said this morning, I think, is the perfect kind of feedback on this, is that we don't have a silver bullet for parking. We're not going to get one solution that solves everything. So we may have to try a kind of rolled out improvements on that as well, kind of a step-by-step process. Eddie gave a good example this morning, and that matrix that I showed earlier, there's a similar one for parking. And what that does is starts with on-street parking stalls, kind of just simple striping that can be done to alleviate some of the inefficiently used parking areas, to better signage coordinated with, like I said, not just the striping, but also the painting of curbs and things like that, to everything to time restricted parking, designated employee parking areas, enforcement of time limited parking, and finally remote overflow parking lots or offsite type of parking systems. Like I said, here's that matrix, that kind of step-by-step process that could lead to some of the different scenarios that we might try to resolve some of the issues. And the step-by-step process could start with simply striping downtown, spread that further into the midtown, install clear legible signs for on-street parking stalls, remove the painted curbs as a step 2 throughout the downtown and midtown area, because they're not conducive, or they don't meet the same requirements throughout where other people come from. So they don't really know what this color means or what this striping means. And so to make that more wayfinding and user-friendly for people, that's another key component. Designate employee parking lot locations on and off street, transition to employee parking permits, identify remote parking lots for employee and overflow as the final step. So that's just one example of a parking management scenario that we might look at. It's not to say it's the only one. I think that's why we have the public process. We get everyone's input. Let us know and get feedback on that as we develop that. So pedestrian bicycle system. One of the things we want to point out is that we don't want to put Portland complete street sidewalks and or Oregon State model anything into Cannon Beach. We want to be sensitive to each one of these improvements, whether it's a shoulder improvement, whether it's a multi-use trail, but that we can scale that to our city and our community. And I think the range of options that the plan provides gives us that opportunity. The one example shown here with the trail, the multi-use trail with the ground shoulder, just an example of how that ground shoulder or compressed shoulder could be used along, say, Hemlock through the to and through the S curves, those types of things, or around the Haystack Hill area. These are types of improvements that could help connect the north to the south, which is one of the, if not the most requested item that I've received so far with the public comments, is some type of safe, reliable north-south connection. Pedestrian bicycle system. These are some that go back to that key that I showed you to the map, and you'll see that it's this portion of the transportation study is to develop that north-south connection key. This came out of the earlier work for the parks master plan and trail work. And much of this was included in that as part of some of their major priorities for the future. And so this is to complete some of that and to give alternatives to some of those that were included in that. That S-curves bypass, the blue one, this has all been updated Also to include the new assembly area locations and the latest Dogami Beat the Wave studies. If you haven't seen that document has also just been released, the new study for Cannon Beach on that. And this has been coordinated through Rick Hudson, our emergency manager, so that we leverage that emergency management segment along with our trails and paths network. And so we hope to incorporate all of that. And that's why it's been great to have Rick as part of the project advisory committee, to have Karen and Trevor as part of that group as well from Public Works, and to get our other local officials involved with regional partners like our Sunset Empire, ODOT professionals, and others in this network. So the bicycle network and crossings, just as the north-south connection is important, we also have people out there that are definitely concerned about cross safings, crossing by Haystack there is one of the most dangerous areas. We hear that all the time. And you'll see in this transportation system plan, new crossings, new areas. Most of them are just new crossing areas, the striping and safe places to cross at the safest places we could find to cross, along with sharrows and enhanced connections for signage, and those can be fairly low cost. $7,000 you'll see on this, for instance, for some of these, but some of them could be the more improved crossings that have been suggested, where we might even have solar light components that will help. I got a suggestion this week, or one person saying, if you do anything with the transportation system plan, please light some of these crossings at night, especially in the Midtown area. Midtown area is a lot of pedestrian crossings in this area, and lighting is not in pattern often with that, and can be dangerous, especially, it does rain here occasionally. And so finally, one of the other things that is also in our plan, we kept at the forefront of our plan, is emergency response and evacuation system. So you'll see in the new Dogami Beat the Wave, they also modeled how, where people could get in 20 minutes with the new routing, and included in that models with evacuation towers in key areas in downtown. I think one of them is located right around the Chamber area. And so how those models change, how can people find relief during an evacuation incident. And they don't have to look like this. I made a joke this morning that wherever they source this from, the Visual Engineering Resource Group, probably need to go back to the drawing board because it's not visual. And but there are great solutions out there. More and more communities are doing this. Some of them are getting funding through the hazard mitigation work and federal dollars, state dollars to help them do these. And they can be combined into other things like parking structures or other buildings. And they can be utilized from everything from lookout towers or event spaces to even recreation type of facilities in there, which are being utilized. So these are the things that we may not see, but it may be a solution that we want to incorporate, whether it's a public-private partnership in someone's new project, or someplace that we find it would definitely help our response to tsunamis. Public transportation, if anyone is worried about our workforce. Public transportation is a key component of that workforce. As anyone who looked at or was part of my Housing Matters discussion or any of our Housing Matters discussion so far, you'll see that our workforce comes not from Cannon Beach. Our workforce comes from throughout Clatsop County and farther afield. And public transportation plays a key role in that and will play an ever increasing role with that. And so we want to keep this plan forward focus and looking at that. One of the suggestions in the matrix is a new North End bus stop, many mobility hubs, these ideas that you can charge your electric vehicles, but you can also switch. Some mini mobility hubs have facilities at them where people can store their personal items while they make that connection. Some even in larger areas or other areas have restroom facilities or showering facilities, things like that. Some back coastal Georgia where they have bike repair stations as part of that. But to increase the connections and to incorporate these different modes of travel are key to those, increasing our inner city service area. We heard more and more people say we just need more service. The circulator shuttle and the employee and even a possible employee shuttle might be a solution for the future. One of the things we also heard from our PAC, and it was a great comment, one of our PAC members discussed, if you're talking about employee shuttles, you're talking about off-site employee parking, it's important to keep in mind that these folks are already traveling from a distance. And so, we will also, I walked my dog yesterday, ran into one of our local restaurateurs, and he said, he just can't get help right now. It's almost to where he can't expand his service and can't do outdoor service or, any expanded need because he just can't, he doesn't have a workforce to do that. And so we have got to look at housing, transportation, and those connections with everything we do from now on and how we're going to resolve this, because these owners and operators of businesses are in need of help for these things, and we need to find solutions. So I think the transportation system plan comes along at a perfect time to kind of help us with some of these alternatives. So here's the matrix. I'm not going to dig into details of each, but I do hope that everyone gets a chance to read the document over the next couple of weeks and then take part in that. Okay. I'm sorry, I'm trying to administer the meeting as well as, all right, here we go.